This is
The
Unwritten.
The Unwritten.
The Unwritten. The Unwritten.
We are Journey Writers, the literary innovative team that are hoping to reach a very wide audience. Today we'll be talking about reading slumps and, how we got into them and how we've gotten out of them. It's so funny now that I think about it. Actually, when I started Journey Writer with Susan, it was at a weird time because at the time I was like so deep in schoolwork, I didn't really have the time to think about books outside of whatever I was being assigned in class. And I didn't have time to write much anything except what ideas popped up for me at 10 o'clock at night before the next class day. And so that has been a really weird moment for me in my life. And it has had an effect on how I view my career and how I approach my career as an editor and how I, what has become normal for me. Like maybe we can first start by just defining a reading slump. Do y'all have a certain definition for it?
I'll chime in on this one. I think a reading slump is just where you have, just simply put, no desire to really pick up a book and read. At least that's how it is for me. And I've been in a very similar situation where I have had no interest really in any genre. Like I've read over the years, but I honestly haven't completely finished a book for a multitude of reasons, honestly. And it's just, I'm still just trying to get back into it, but I think I'm just trying to figure out what genre it is that I actually want to read currently.
A reading slump for me looks like any type of reading material on printed paper. I don't want to read it. If it's an essay, if it's a story, if it's a flyer even.
Yeah.
I don't want to read this. So after undergrad and after working in the Center for Writing and Communications during undergrad, reading my work and reading other people's work and being a writing major, I had, a time where I just did not want to read anything. Like if it was longer than a list of things or longer than a paragraph, I did not want to read it. I felt nauseous thinking about reading. So that was my type of reading slump. It got really bad.
Yeah, I agree. Just to chime in, I agree with what everyone said. And I also think that just, social media plays a lot into, our attention span and, how long does it take, keep our attention to read something. And for me, I think social media really did it for me. I noticed my attention span was so short. Even just on my phone, if it wasn't on Instagram, on a story or something like that, if I clicked to go to I'm the type to fall into those clickbaity, blogs and stuff like that, and news articles and stuff. When I see the clickbait, I won't even go to the article and actually read it. I'll just read, what other people have said, because that's how lazy I am. And that's what I, vision as a reading slump. Just, not even wanting to read this, just being really lazy about reading overall.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in the position that Susan's in, kind of trying to figure out, what it is I actually want to read, especially now that I'm more about reading about peaceful things, and that's really tough. Right now, we're in a time where peaceful things and things that are, joyful are rare, especially for BIPOCs. And things that are popular are mostly books by white people who are not American, which is funny. But kind of having to figure out what genre am I down to read? Am I okay with certain things? Am I not okay with certain things? And especially after being in a class full of people who write all sorts of stuff for so long. I remember being in nonfiction classes and just being down for hours afterwards. Because I'm what do I do after that experience? So it's really tough. Trying to figure out what I want to, where I want to be, how I want to do it. And I think being in a reading slump is more about, kind of what Susan was saying too about having a short attention span. but also just like having no craving whatsoever to pick up anything you have to actually read.
I think also something with what Infiniti was talking about just having to read so much in school that I think, and this is what probably caused it for me, was just burnout of reading. Because I know in my program in undergrad and also grad school, there was so much reading involved. If it wasn't a textbook, it was an article. If it wasn't that, it was a book. And there's just so much. And at the end of the day, honestly, your eyes just get tired. And then my time as a news reporter, I was having to read a lot of articles, just vetting stories and figuring out things that I could go and report on a local level instead of a national level. And that takes a lot of time and reading, and then on top of that, writing and editing articles. So I'm having to write and reread and edit things that I wrote, so it was just even more reading on top of that. But one of the things that got me into reading early on in my earlier college days, before I was really deep into the writing classes, it was actually how I decompressed from everything else. It's how I just kind of escaped. But I still haven't gotten out of the current reading slump that I'm in. And I think a lot of it is just figuring out what is going to grab my interest and what it is that I want to read. And on top of that, just finding the time, because, we don't have the time like we did when we were students.
That's definitely something I had to do, was having to, like I said earlier, dealing with other people and their stuff. You're so consumed with how, I think being in creative writing, having to be so consumed with how to critique other people's work, I lost interest in other people's style and technique. And because that was what I read, I was so in love with technique and so in love with watching people tell these stories and take you to a new place. And it was definitely how I decompressed, but it also just it was a way I learned, just reading other people's stuff. And then being bombarded with stuff that you really probably didn't want to read, and on top of the stuff that you were interested in, was too much. And then you have to get a grade. So, so because you got to get this grade, that's the stuff that you don't really want to read. It takes priority, and you lose a little interest. But yeah.
I think it's just interesting when you see like the pattern of like because like I think I only endure like one. Luckily, I'm not in a reading slump right now, but I think for most people, it's usually like derives from school, and then another part is just like when you become an adult and you have so many like other important priorities that you have to prioritize.
Yeah, I don't know, Infiniti. Like, what do you think? I guess, do you have an alternative? I know since you don't really want to pick up little stuff to read, like what alternatives do you have to just like keep your mind entertained or like fill in that gap of reading?
Yeah, I think I really enjoy music. So like for me, that has always been like my outlet or my form of entertainment. Or just honestly YouTube videos or anything that's not reading that doesn't feel like it's causing my brain to work, right? Like I'm absorbing this information, I'm getting the information, podcasts, audiobooks, things like that. But the actual act of sitting down and opening a book and reading, or like reading anything, is what feels more like a slump to me, So that would be an alternative, because I'm a lifelong learner, right? I love to information. I love to learn new things, but sometimes reading is not the mode in which I ingest that information.
Yeah.
Did you guys ever, this is something that came to mind, and I think this kind of, when I was in high school, kind of hurt my reading shrink and like made me have a reading slump, but like reading fan fiction. I feel like when we were in high school, that was a big thing. And the writing, like, I know people would complain about, like, the writing quality a lot because, like, it would be horribly edited. It had, like, no plot. It would just jump from one thing to another. And it just made reading really hard. Like, do you guys find that even in books that you read after, the experience that you have and the degrees that you have and what you've learned and know, do you ever find yourself, like, as you're reading, you just kind of start critiquing the book? And so that kind of takes the joy out of reading.
What do we call it? A reading snob or a literary snob.
Yeah, and I just did it with the last book I just read. What was that book called? I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy.
Yeah.
I just got finished reading that book. Oh my gosh. Like, she's an actor, but she's definitely not a writer. It was interesting, but like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I was editing it like as I was reading it. Like it was just like
I feel that.
Yeah.
Oh man. I did that with, and I hadn't you know, you just get your bachelor's degree and you top notch. But I went to graduate school. I was in California, and I bought these books just because I was like, I'm gonna get out my reading slump now before I get to graduate school. And I bought Emergency Contact, and I cannot remember for the life of me who the author was. I was interested because I didn't grow up reading a lot of books by Asian authors, and I just was very intrigued by this particular book. So I bought Emergency Contact, and I remembered reading it, but then I remember not liking what I was reading, so I just put it down. And then I picked it up again a year later, after like a year into graduate school, picked it up, and I was reading the notes I had wrote, and I was so brutal with these notes. I just wrote on the side of the margins, and I've never been a margin writer. Like, I've never been like, write in the side what you feel and bookmark it and highlight it. And you see that a lot on Bookstagram and, you know, TikTok. But I was like, oh my gosh, I was so mean here. And I think that's an interesting thing. I was talking to another editor about that, just kind of becoming, or not an editor, I was talking to an HR person, and we were just talking about how studying the thing you're interested in, the thing you want to create a career in, makes you kind of a snob in it. You know, suddenly, like, you don't know everything, but you know that's not right. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, so I have experience with that. It's kind of weird, and I feel bad a lot of times.
Yeah, I actually felt that way with the Four Agreements. I thought it was a good book in the sense that it provided a lot of great information, and the Four Agreements, you know, as they are, make sense. Great information, but the writing style, I just couldn't necessarily get into it. You know, I think I definitely experienced some of that literary snobbing vibe whenever I read that book, for sure, because it kind of, you know, there's a difference between writing and talking, right? Like, you don't necessarily write like how you talk, and there's conventions to writing, and so that book felt a lot just like almost like train of thought type of writing, and you know, like I said, great message, but because of it, I was like, I liked the book, I love the messaging, but didn't really enjoy the style of writing.
Yeah, that happens a lot in terms of technique. I think that was one reason I hate third person. I hate to say it like that, but I can't stand third person writing. A lot of times it's kind of like listing sentences for me. And I end up becoming a snob about that too. Kind of like, you could have wrote this, I could have gotten a total. And it's funny how once you study enough technique and, you know, and you go back, so you study enough, you go back and you read the books you read as a kid, and you're like, what did I like about this? Is it made me who I am, and then added to probably that thing that makes technique important to me, or makes, you know, what I favor in terms of being a writer or as an editor. Like, what was it that I liked about those things? And I didn't even realize, for me, part of my snobbiness is like actually choosing a point of view for writing. Like, when something's written in third person, I immediately want to close the book. Because you could have wrote this in first person, and I would have felt more included as I read it. I would have felt like, okay, I am this person. I'm in this person's shoes. I feel where they're coming from. And sometimes that ends up being completely missed when you write in third person. Actually feeling the characters, actually feeling the environment, the emotions that they're feeling. And, you know, you get into that whole discussion of show and not tell. But that kind of stuff, technique, and thinking about the books I liked and why I liked them and how they built me up to be the writer and the editor that I am, becomes really important. Which kind of brings up a thought for me. Like, have you guys gone back and tried to, like, if you're trying to get out of your reading slump at the moment, have you guys gone back and tried to, like, read the books you used to love as kids and start from there and build up? Or have y'all just started with whatever's popular at the moment?
That's something that I actually thought about just now, was because there are some books that I just recall reading, or like books that really got me into reading at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, maybe if I go back and read that one, maybe that'll kind of jumpstart my need and want to, to read more. And I haven't done it yet, mainly because my books are like still in a box or something just from moving a year ago. And I just haven't really thought about it. And again, it just kind of goes back to time, but I don't know if it would jumpstart. I've never tried it, but I would like to give it a shot just to see if it actually does do something for me, if it at least sets me on the right, in the right direction to get to where I need to go for upping my reading count each year. And sometimes people will set goals every year to like read books, and they'll try to like read 100 books a year. But I haven't set a goal like that for myself yet, simply because I know I would not meet it at the rate that I'm going.
Yeah, I'm someone that appreciates the nostalgic feeling of the memory of things. And I just think there's some value in just like encapsulating that memory and like leaving it untouched. I'm one of those people that I don't necessarily like reboots that much, because anyway, that's another part of that conversation. But I don't necessarily go back to the things that I read when I was younger, because I feel like the way that it impacted me back then was significant. And I don't want to read it with a new perspective and kind of like either not like the book as much or not like the author as much, or, I think we've grown so much as a society where things that honestly that may have been okay back then are not okay now. And so I think just leaving those things untouched and leaving it as a memory has been my practice. So I haven't revisited just for that reason.
Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. I feel like I'm kind of split between Infiniti and Ian and Susan, because I had a little short slump last year after like when I was in grad school, but after I had graduated, I kind of like got back into writing because I bought so many books. That's another thing that helps me, is because I bought so many books, and I feel like I'm just wasting my money if I don't read them.
Oh.
And and I had like a huge pile, so like I finally started reading last year again, but I didn't like pick up all of the old books, because like I have like all of my teen like heavy books that I love, like all of my Hunger Games, Twilight, The Maze Runner, all of those type books. I have all of those, and I was looking at them, and then I did feel that nostalgia, but I didn't feel like a sense of like urge to read them. So like I just been reading like a lot of the newer books that I bought.
I think I'm wow. I'm all about. I don't even know about the nostalgia. I don't even think about it like that. But I think that's a brilliant way to think about your. It's a funny way to say this, but it's a brilliant way to think about your childhood. But I think because I always took books as like, this is definitely the career I want to take on. This is what I want to do. Books for me at a time when I was very like alone, or it wasn't even alone, but just was not in a great space. Books were a great escape for me, and they were like another world, but they were also my future. And so I thought about them like not, I don't know, like teaching tools. You know how we have those books that are like so and so for dummies, those books.
Yeah.
Every book was like that for me. And so how do I write this? How do I express this? And how do I do this? And so I have decided that I had made decisions where I went ahead and reread The Host or reread like Kristen Ashley books, because I wanted to understand my roots. Like, why did I start writing? What was it that was important to me? Why did I want to get into publishing? And it helps me do research on things that are popular, compare and contrast in terms of trends and things that are popular now versus things that were not popular then, and get a better understanding of why, as a Black woman, I was so into the books that I was into, and why that might not be a part of like the Black books or the Black community's books or books written by Black authors, that sort of thing. So I was really, to get out of my reading slump, because now I've kind of really just gotten out of my reading slump, I really just dove right into those books that I loved as a kid. And I'm now I realized I should have gave the Maze Runner and like the Hunger Games and the Host and what is it? Divergent, those series, I should have gave them more attention, because in comparison now we don't get the same energy or the same detail or the same attentiveness, right? And so I've really come to a point of like, wow, this is what I was into and this is what I want again. Yeah, I've gotten back that taste for what I really want, and I'm looking for it, but it's actually really hard to find nowadays.
I think for me, going into that, because one of the things that I've thought about are just like how phases of life can affect your interest and like what genres you want. Like I still am a sucker for a good love story, but for me, I don't feel the need to pick up like a contemporary romance novel, not like those extremely like steamy romance novels, but just like the contemporary like summer love type books. And I think part of that may just be my phase of life. And so I think for me, there are some books that I read in the past, like, and when I say past, I'm talking like college, because I didn't read much in high school either, because I wasn't into it, because it was forced on us in English class. But there's some books that hold a good like memory for me. Like one of the books that really kickstarted me into reading was a book that my mom actually got signed by an author, and at the time I was considering like, do I want to do something with writing in my career? Like what do I want to do? Because I was in college. I was a freshman at the time, maybe. Yeah, I was a freshman. And she brought it to me when I was at work one day, and it's an Arkansas author, and I opened up the cover and it was signed. It said, "Good luck on your writing career," and then the author's name. And I just thought that was really cool. And it wasn't a busy day at work, and I worked at a hotel, so I just sat at the front desk and just read the book. And I think I finished it in like 2 days. It was a really good read, but I think there was just some encouragement with that book and that nostalgia of it. That just really resonated with me at the time. And I look back, being older, and again, like that book was a love story. At the end of the day, there was a love story between two people that I just adored, and I was like, oh, this would be so, because a lot of times I would read love stories and I would just wish like, oh, I wish this was my life, and I wish that this was happening to me. But going back to, not really wanting to read those books, because like I'm getting married in 6 months, and so I just don't feel the need to read books like that and like fantasize and think about what my life could be, because I'm perfectly happy with where it's at. And so I think that my surroundings in my life and my situation affect what I want to read. It's like right now, like thrillers or like mysteries might be something that I'm really into. Like I loved Nancy Drew growing up. I love the solving of the mysteries and everything, because I love the strategy involved. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love writing too, is just the strategy. But for me, it's the nostalgia, and also just like my life situation and how that affects my reading choices, and if I even want to read it all at that time.
Like you realize a lot of people read based off of that emotional, whatever they're going through in life at that moment, right? And if they have time, because there are people who literally don't have time to sit down and just breathe long enough to read a book or have a choice in reading a book. And that's where audiobooks come in. That's a different conversation. But it's kind of interesting to see TikToks like that, because a lot of times people are saying, like, in terms of reading contemporary romances, they're saying things like, well, do you read contemporary romances just because you love love, or do you read them because you wish this was you, or something like that? And I think that's interesting, thinking about what we're actually wishing for in our life at that moment, and whether reading feels whatever we think it's supposed to feel. If it feels something when you were in high school, and it feels something when you were in middle school, but does it feel anything for you at this age, at this moment in your life? And that's some scary stuff to think about, because it's something that you probably put a lot of importance on when you were younger. Like for me, books were so important. Like I said, they were the escape. They were the opportunity for me to decompress. and there's something I want to make a career out of. So to think, is it something that's actually filling something for my life right now?
That was really interesting when you said that, because I think I used to do the same thing when I was younger. I would pick up books, especially like, those enemies to lovers books, romances and stuff like that. I would read that just because it's something that I long for. But now that I've gotten older, I notice a lot of the books I read are based on my interests, because I watch a lot of historical fiction. And so I read a lot of historical fiction now. Like, I've just got finished reading 2 historical fiction books about, one was about the first Black woman's army in the 1940s. And the other one was about, it was based off Bridgerton. Well, it's not based off Bridgerton, but it's kind of like, it has like that Edwardian, Victorian era or whatever. But yeah, I agree. It's when you said that it is something that's important to think about, because we don't really think about it like that. And now when I read books, I read them because I'm interested into the topic instead of because it's what I'm longing for in my life.
Yeah, I worry about that in terms of when I pick up a romance book. I do think about that when I pick up a romance book. Am I reading these because I love love, or is it because I'm craving something? And a lot of times, for me, I've always loved romance books. And I guess even too, at a time where like I've never dated. So I think at a time where I really wasn't thinking about it. Like, I just loved watching people fall in love. I don't have any like, I never think like that. I wish such and such would happen to me. And but I'm thinking like, dang, I'm so happy for these people. Like, genuinely just happy for for these fantasy people. These people are not real. But I'll be so happy for people.
I was going to say, especially when you think about like quality versus quantity. It was maybe like a tweet or something. I thought I screenshotted it. I was looking for it, but they were like, a certain author publishes like 4 or 5 books a year. Like, she's like the Shein of the publishing world. Like, you think you're going to get a quality book, but you're really not, I just thought that was pretty funny, because I feel like there is something to say about writers that take a little bit more time to perfect their craft, and not knocking anyone's hustle. Like, if that's going to put the food on the table and keep the lights on, then by all means, write your books. But it seems like there's people that still desire quality books, quality stories, and just good information, and not just those little quick fixes. Because apparently this particular author's books are like in Sam's Club available like at $10 or something like that. Like, you can get a lot of her books for very cheap. So
that's something that I've actually thought of, because that's actually what I was going to mention, was and kind of going back to what Cait was talking about with her, like the attention span of readers. I feel like a lot of books nowadays, they get through the plot a lot quicker. They get to the point. They make the action happen, because a lot of readers nowadays, they want it. There's always that saying, like, we're the generation of we wanted it yesterday when it comes to like ordinary stuff. And I think when it comes to reading stories, we just want to read it as quickly as we can. We don't want to be like dragged on. And I personally like reading the details and figuring out the mysteries in the book and putting the pieces together. But there are times where I honestly just want a quick read. And so I think that's where, authors like the one that Infiniti's talking about really kind of comes in, because they can get you that quick fix of a quick read. Now, the quality, again, may not be the best, but again, that may just be their writing style. That may be kind of their formula when it comes to just getting to the point, getting to the plot a lot quicker, because they know that the kids these days and social media and wanting things really quickly and wanting to get to the answers for the questions really quickly. I think that's maybe where some writing has changed, and why when it comes to reading slumps, why I may not be picking up as much books, because maybe I need those quick reads to kind of get the wheels started, and then eventually get back into those more longer form styles of writing with all the details, just because I think sometimes when you pick up a book and it's really thick, especially if you're in a reading slump, it can seem daunting, where it's like, okay, this book's like 537 pages and I want to read this whole thing. But then there's this other book that's like 200 pages and it's a lot quicker moving through the plot. It, you know, it doesn't kind of add in those, you could say, important details, but like the details that some seasoned authors, like I'll say John Grisham as an example.
Because I loved that amateur feeling. I loved reading these mistakes or reading how, because you could see how a writer was thinking, like what they were thinking about, how they were processing it. You could see the development, the growth in their technique, and you never stop growing as a writer.
No,
technique
you never do.
Constantly changes. Ideas constantly shift for you. Breaking the rules, breaking what you think is a rule is constant for you. And so that was always awesome. I think what ends up being disappointing, though, is like that becomes the trend and the acceptable thing. And so when it starts selling, now everybody's going to do it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Now everybody's going to have that quality. Now everybody's going to go, well, this is what's acceptable. And suddenly you don't have a book that you fall deeply and amicably in love with.
Yeah.
Like, you just kind of have a bunch of quick reads on your shelf.
Yeah.
And not everybody wants that. Some people, you know, I guess the question is, how do you balance that? And how does that add, for me, that adds to my reading slump? Because suddenly, like, do I stick to the books that I've, you know, read in the past? Or how do I find authors and writers and books and stories that I feel like I can grow old with?
Yeah, I think, you know, kind of going back to what I said, I just kind of see it as, you know, quick reads. You know, again, it's like they're hustling, putting, if it's for food, on the table. But I also think it does serve a purpose, especially in reading slumps where it may be a shorter book and you get through it quicker and you kind of have that sense of accomplishment and it was a good story, and then you just kind of start reading and then eventually maybe you want to go deeper into something, but it may, and those quick reads could also help you figure out what genre you might be interested in as well.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Definitely figuring out your genre, like what you interested in reading, kind of helps you like read faster, because like so far I've read like 6 books this year, and I think it's because of the genres that I'm reading, because I've been reading YA mostly, and then like I've read like 3 historical fiction books, and I've been reading a lot of nonfiction books. So I'm reading Prince Harry's book right now, and that's like a thick book right now. So, but it's interesting because it's about his life, and I don't really know much about his life, but I always find him and again so interesting to me in their entire life, and you know, so I definitely think it's about mainly what interests you in the genre.
Do you guys have any advice for people who are trying to get out of their reading slump, if they are in one, or who are just trying to be, you know, actually start a reading journey? Like maybe they don't have one at all and they just want to start.
For me, I think one of the ways I think that can easily help people if we gather slump is persuasion and then accountability. So persuasion, I mean, like for me, like in my job, my coworker, she was like super into reading, and she like kind of got me back into it, and like she really persuaded me, you know, to like, okay, I want to pick up this book now. I want to start reading again. Mm-hmm. I know I love it, so that kind of persuaded me. And accountability, I think. So, like, for that, I think, like, joining a reading group, you know, like a book club or something like that, that kind of, like, makes you, I guess, like, more responsible to, like, hurry up and finish a book. So that way you won't be lost. And, like, when they all meet and you're, like, the only one that didn't read it. So, I guess, like, you feel kind of bad because you didn't read it. So now you're, like, accountable for not reading the book, you know, on top of joining the club, you know. So I think that's another good, you know, like persuasion maybe to get you out of your slump. Also, just like go to Barnes and Noble and just like walk around. Yeah. You don't even have to buy a book, you know. Just I feel like when you're like in a bookstore, it kind of like gives you like this like type of euphoric feeling that you want to read a book. If that makes sense.
I agree with you, Cait. I feel like I had to stop myself from going into bookstores because I was like, at this point, I'm just a book collector. Like, I'm not even reading it. I'm just buying books, collecting it. sitting on the shelf, not doing anything with it. But I think my biggest piece of advice, if you are in a reading slump, depending on where it come from, like if it's because of burnout, then just allow yourself to relax and take that breath and just take a breather from reading for a bit, and then start off small, right? So like maybe a page a day, like pick your book, or like, you know, a paragraph a day, and then just start to build those habits, and then eventually you'll start to really enjoy reading again, and you'll pick up the pace a lot more, especially if it's something that interests you and not like required reading. So definitely just take a breather, and also when you get back into it, just take it step by step, because it can be a lot mentally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I piggyback on both what Cait and Infiniti are talking about because of like the snowball effect of starting small and working your way up to something bigger, and just finding something you might be interested in. And I think it's okay to start a book and get halfway through and just realize, I don't like this isn't going anywhere for me.
Yeah.
Put the book down. Like, don't, just because you start a book doesn't necessarily mean you have to finish it. That's just one that you can cross off your list, or maybe you realize, I do not like this genre, it is not my thing. But one thing that I thought of that I know my mom has done in the past is maybe find a book club, and you may read some books in there that you don't like, but you might find one that you love. And sometimes if you're really strict about it, if you've been in a reading slump for a long time and you really just want to kick it into gear, sometimes accountability can help. You just need to be held accountable for yourself. And on top of that, I think when you have constant discussions about a book that you're reading and somebody mentions a part and you're thinking, oh, I haven't gotten there yet, you want to get to that point. So maybe it can provide some motivation. So maybe if you don't have a book club, maybe start one yourself, or just get a group of friends, 2-3 max or more, and just start one and just see where that gets you. But I think the biggest thing is just start small.
I agree. All those things are brilliant. I agree with all of those things. I think for me, it's very much about your mental state. Don't think about it as a task. Don't think about it as something you have to do. Like I said, Cait, what Season was saying. Don't think about it as like something you have to do. Like, I have to finish this whole book. No, you don't have to. It's just something you saw, you noticed, and you were interested in. And, you know, a lot of people, like, really start with just fall into their guilty pleasures, you know. Some people really love steamy romances, and that's their thing. Some people love things that are about history, and that's their thing. It don't have anything to do with their daily life or their career. They just like this thing. Be okay with that. Don't let people dictate what you should be interested in and whether you should be interested in it, because at the beginning, you're just trying to start, you know. And then don't get so consumed by this one concept in a book that you don't take on interest in other concepts that are happening in that book, so that you can build other interests as you read, as you build your reading list. I think it's really a mental thing, just making sure that you're not making it a task on your to-do list to read something today.
Thank you for hopping on this call with Journey Writer. We hope you enjoyed The Unwritten. Please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can find the links mentioned in the episode in our show notes along with social media. We will talk to you next time.